Hello everybody, thank you so much for turning into G2G Kodia No Filter. We're so happy that you're joining us today. We're going to be talking about a little bit of a heavy topic, which is suicide, particularly teen suicide. For those of you that are watching and you think that you need help, please go get help. For those of you that feel lonely, that you feel like you're a burden, you are not. We'll be the first to say it. Like always, you can reach out to different hotlines like the one that we mentioned here on these comments, but also at the same time, reach out to your friends, family, youth pastors, comment below, get in touch with us. Thank you so much for watching, and then we'll get right into it today. Okay, so in your G2G Bible study material, you can get that also on the link down below and find out more information on that. Here is a wonderful questionnaire that deals with kind of suicide, depression, anxiety. So over the last 2 weeks, okay, we're gonna just have everybody raise your hand. We're not going to go through the whole thing, but I'm gonna pick 3 or 4, and then just simply be vulnerable, raise your hand, and we can go from there. Over the last 2 weeks, how often have you been bothered by the following problems? Okay, so the first one is feeling nervous, anxious, or on the edge. Not at all. Okay, several days. More than half of the 2 weeks. Nearly every day. All right. Becoming easily annoyed or irritable. Not at all. Several days. More than half the 2 weeks. Nearly every day. That was me, actually, during that time. Next, feeling down, depressed, or hopeless. Not at all. Several days. More than half the days. Nearly every day.
Looks like we all need to seek therapy.
Naomi, can we set up an appointment with you?
Therapy right now.
Okay, and lastly, thoughts that you would be better off dead or hurting yourself. Not at all. Several days. More than half the days. Nearly every day. Okay. So as you can see as you're watching, that you are not alone in what you're going through. Because clearly even us on this panel are feeling this way too.
So today we are talking about suicide, depression, and anxiety. And right now, suicide is the 10th leading cause of death in the US. It's the #1 leading cause of death in South Korea amongst teens and youth. In 2017 alone, there were 1,400,000 suicide attempts. And among those, 47,000 around were successful. That's a lot. That's a lot of deaths. And just so you guys know, the suicide rate keeps going up. So this is something that's increasing in our day and age amongst young adults and youth, and is a cause for concern, and is the reason why we're talking about it today. There was even the show that was recent
with 13 Reasons Why. Yeah. 13 Reasons Why is about a story of a young lady who records herself going through the process of being bullied, being raped, going through all of this alone, and someone gets a hold of that tape, and then we actually go into the psychology and why she committed suicide. And one of the things I thought of while watching some of the episodes was, imagine if she was able to do that with a person. If she wasn't, felt like she was so alone that she had to go into a tape, but rather like speak to a person daily about today, this is what's happened. Thank you for listening. Thank you for that support. And one of the things that I found was kind of interesting and kind of scary was actually after 13 Reasons Why, teen suicide rates have actually went up. And I'm not saying there's a correlation in terms of that the show itself caused it, but the show is pointing to an epidemic in America where a lot of teens believe this is a solution to the situations that they're facing.
I think the beautiful thing about that show was that it gave a personal glimpse into people's experiences. And I'm curious today about some of your guys' experiences with struggling with depression, with anxiety, with suicidal thoughts. Maybe it's your own, or maybe it's someone that you know who's close to you.
For me, when I was, I'd say like transitioning from elementary to middle school, I was at this Korean American church, and I'm actually half Korean, half Japanese. But because of all the, I guess, old history and the wars and kind of like the tension between the two ethnicities, I was severely bullied a lot at my church. And because of that, I did feel very isolated. I did go through some terms of depression. And what was really hard for me was being Korean American, being that Asian American, having that culture of isolationism and, you know, saving face. No, you can't talk about this. No, your emotions are not valid. You just need to hold it in. And that kind of culture, I think, is a big reason why I think specifically Asian Americans are dealing with a lot of depression, anxiety, suicidal thoughts.
So I struggle with depression. I'd say it's a cycle. And I'd say it's that way because I feel like in Korean American culture, there's always the pursuit of like striving to get better. And no matter how hard I tried, I would always be in the same place. It just came back harder, and one way that I got better was through talking with other people, especially like when it came to self-worth and how the same issues would keep on coming up again and again, and how hard it got. And also, that being said, people aren't perfect. I remember this time I was sharing with a mentor, and it was really hard because it was something he struggled with, but he sounded very disappointed. And it gets really hard for the person struggling to share when it comes to stuff like that.
Yeah.
So yeah, for me particularly, last year, 2018, was really hard. I was going through my own depression, and it was a really, really, really dark time, and I was escaping through many unhealthy ways. But particularly two of my friends committed suicide, both millennials. I was sitting in class, it was a music business class, and I get a text message from my friend, and he's like, "Hey man, have you heard of what happened to was a coworker of mine. He was like one of my first friends at this job I used to work for. And he was just this bright, really, awesome guy. He was good looking, he was like buff, and he worked out all the time. And he was like my first friend at this company. And I was like, no, what's going on? And he's like, hey man, he killed himself last night. It was a really shocking thing for me because I didn't expect to do that. And when I was reading his father's obituary, it was saying that how felt like he was damaged goods, like that was literally the words he used. And a lot of that kind of coping with the idea that he was damaged goods, he was doing by himself. Now, what I don't think helped was during that time, I was so obsessed with social media that I was like posting, and it's because of my music. I'm like trying to share my music. I'm like hiring like a PR company to do my like followers and everything. And I remember reaching out to me. I'd be like, hey man, how do you have so many followers? And and then like he would like ask about like all these things. And like I had this public persona that I was constantly putting out. And I noticed that, was also doing the same thing. And I think in his loneliness, that one kind of connection that he had, even with me and maybe a lot of his friends, was like this medium of like Instagram. Like that was the only place that he could be like, hey, I exist. Here's a picture. Here's what I've done. And what I've realized is that obviously likes, comments, no matter how many of those, that can never replace a real human being sitting with them saying like, how are you? Simply that. And I was just crying in the classroom, and my professor was like, hey, are you okay? And I was like, yeah, I just need to step out. And I felt like, as a friend, like I failed him. Like I was just so caught up in all these different things I was doing, like I wasn't a good friend.
I feel like, actually in my experience, I was freshman president for my school, so personally, I definitely felt like this need, especially on social media, to have that kind of presidential sort of stance, make sure that I am like quote unquote perfect or Instagram ready. But honestly, I actually have a spam account. I don't know if you guys do this or have friends who do this, but some people actually have spam accounts where they just post whatever, like they're going through like their actual like real feelings, whether it be depression, anxiety. but they have it in a private account because they don't want to show other people. And then for me personally, I still have the spam account. So, it's definitely like prevalent today. But I definitely do feel like that kind of like culture, like, you need to be perfect. You need to kind of brush off your imperfections. And I feel like sometimes, yes, it can help when you reach out to other people. But most of the time in my spam, like, people don't care. They read it, they like it, but there's no personal connection.
Yeah, and I don't know the true science behind this, but this is just my educated guess, is that there is a correlation with suicide rates and like the proliferation of social media. Because even the danger for myself as like this grown ass man is like, anytime because like I can't help but compare myself with other people's highlight reels of like, this person got a house, this person got a baby, oh, this person got a promotion. And I'm sitting here like, oh, I'm a loser. And if someone is already in that state of mind, which I think a lot of people that commit suicide is already, and they're on social media and that's the one place they feel like they can connect, they're going to be like, why? There's something wrong with me. Look at all these pictures, look at all these videos. And we have theme music now.
Welcome back.
But
there is definitely a correlation between depression and use of social media. That's one of the reasons why I don't do the social media. Good excuse for older generation, right?
Well, actually, even just coming here, I was talking to somebody about like, oh yeah, I'm doing this podcast about depression, anxiety, and they were like, okay, just make sure you don't share too much, you don't give away too much, and like that kind of hit me because it's exactly that. That's exactly the reason why we have such high levels of all these issues is because we're not allowed to talk about how we feel. Like when I was like in middle school, people were saying like, no, you cannot see a therapist. That is for crazy people. You cannot. That is off limits for you if you want to be considered a sane person. And I don't think that's healthy to just bottle that all up. And I think like just with my like people that I've been around, like that lack of understanding, like for depression, it's not just one thing you can just don't do it. Oh, all of a sudden I'm cured. It doesn't work like that. It's a constant struggle. It's a constant cycle. Like you need to have like a community to help you, and then they need to understand that it's a process.
I was taught of like trying to live a certain way with like just trying to uphold what's good. And when I kept on struggling with the same thing, it got really frustrating, especially because things didn't seem to get better. And I feel like that's one thing that people that struggle with depression, it's one thing that they really struggle with. It's because it's that feeling of hopelessness that you will never get out of it. It will always be there with you, or it's just so immense. Like, and that struggle can get really hard for people to keep going, and it can lead people to really dark places. But I had the help of many mentors in my life to really help me process. And though I never had a therapist, I really do believe in the power of like community, especially because, like I totally agree with like your comment about how people say, oh, therapy is for crazy people, or people are always like, oh, don't you think you're just overthinking things? You're probably self-diagnosing yourself. And it gets really hard for people to reach out, especially because for people you care about, you're afraid of disappointing them as well.
In high school for me, when I was in junior year, this happened at my high school. I was actually sexually assaulted by a friend at the time. And he pinned me down in the stairwell and he started touching me really inappropriately. And I didn't know what to say in that moment because of all the internalized messages that I took in growing up. And at that age, I think with Korean culture and Asian culture, we don't know how to feel. And so in that moment, I didn't know what to do. I let him do what he needed to do, and then when I realized what he was doing, I pushed him away. And just seconds before it happened, there was a teacher that passed by in the hallway. Saw him acting really weird, but the teacher felt uncomfortable, so they walked away. And then after the incident happened, another teacher walked by. And no one said anything. And so I think after that incident, there's my silence, there's people's silence around it, And as a result of that, I felt like I had to be silent. And so I ruminated, and this depression and anxiety grew inside of me in high school, and my grades fell. I didn't know how to cope with people around me. Thankfully, it didn't go as far as, completing suicide and taking my own life. But I did have those moments of just dark wondering, like, what if? Or what if this happened? Or what if this person knew? What if I spoke up? What if I didn't?
Right.
And there's all of these questions. And I think, I'm curious, you guys are talking a little bit about it, but I'm curious, what messages have you guys internalized from your families or from Korean or Japanese, Asian culture? Like, what do you feel like are the messages that have been internalized that keep you from maybe speaking up or talking about these things?
So when I was 10, my grandma was hospitalized on hospice care. She had terminal stage 4 cancer of lymphoma. It was really rough to see her go through this. And one of the things, she is one of the toughest people I've known. She's a strong believer. And honestly, like, it gets emotional when there's someone very close to you that passes away. And right before she passed away, I was like crying, bawling my eyes out. And she said, it's okay to cry, but you shouldn't cry in front of other people. And that was really like I guess you could say, game changer for me, because ever since then, I've always had this habit of don't let people see, bottle it and then, cry all you want at home because, that's your house, So I've always felt like almost like a sense of shame, a sense of like, I shouldn't do this, I should be better, I should, just kind of suck it up like everyone else. And I feel like that, even though I know that's not true, that's definitely actually going to make things worse. Just the words that people say, they really have a big impact on how you think, and just one thing can really internalize.
Yeah. I had a friend named right, and he was a single parent. So he had Korean mom, just him. They lived in a heavily Latino neighborhood, only Koreans there, poor. They come from abusive families. So there's a lot of key factors there. The thing that set him over the edge was he lost his dog. And he thought I lost my dog, so this is what. So he immediately, it was just really interesting. I met him and I was like, hey, why do you have all these marks on your arms? He's like, well, I did this. And I was like, and I remember thinking, I was 13, and I was like, why would you do that? And he's like, oh, I lost my dog. And I remember as a kid too, I was like, oh man, that dog must have meant a lot. He's like, yeah, that dog did. But as a teenager himself too, that's what he thought. It was the dog, but I think it was the culmination of all these other things. Yeah. There's no support, right? It's a single mom. She's busy with work. Korean parents, they work really, really, really hard, right? Coming home, she's not going to be able to have the energy to be hey, he'll tell me everything that's going on. She doesn't have the psychological training. So it was immediately, he went towards, okay, these are all the things that are happening in my life that's really terrible. So my solution, or the way I'm coping with it, is to harm myself. And harming myself was a way of relief. And that's a really disturbing trend, and something that I'm yeah.
Together with the sense of isolation, Ken, you mentioned, is another pressure is the pressure of perfection. So in other words, the Confucian culture is always idealized person with perfect virtue. Perfect virtue is not revealing your own personal emotion.
Right.
So this is a sense of, weakness or imperfection. It is, in a way, you losing your self-control, or you are not mature enough. That's a very natural part of Asian culture. It's cultural DNA. Right. So suicide happens not only people growing up in poor and single mother or very challenging situation, but actually those who went to so-called Ivy League school. The pressure from the family, and then to live up to that level of expectation, many times they feel they are failures to themselves and their parents. Yeah. So one extreme example is a story of Elizabeth Shin. She entered into the MIT. She was a salvatorian of her school, And just 2 days ago, her parents visited her and bought the gift and took her out for dinner. They had a wonderful relationship, but 2 days later, she burned herself, and burning led to her death. So you never know actually what is going on, and especially in Asian culture, the kids already internalize this sense of perfection and or self-control. And parents, do not have sometimes mental energy, emotional space to go deeper into their children's emotions.
Because they didn't have that either growing
Exactly.
up. Maybe.
Yeah. But also at the same time, always we think we did our part, so kids will be fine. That's, I believe, that blind spot that will create the extreme sense of isolation.
I think you both make a really good point, and I'm thinking about Emily's comment with the silence and the internalized messages, and I feel like there's in Korean and Asian culture in general, there's this idea of like the individual representing the family. If the individual is doing good, the family is doing good. But if the individual is doing bad, the family is doing bad. And so therefore, there's this idea of, okay, if you're doing bad, don't say that you're doing bad because that reflects on the family. But then for me, I then heard messages of like chama, like don't say it. Like just keep it in, chama. And that leads to an inability to cope with our feelings, to actually think and process and grow awareness into what's going on in our minds and what's going on in our hearts. And then, like your friend, actually talking to somebody and reaching out and expressing rather than harming himself. I don't know. I'm wondering, like, what do you guys feel? Is this a good segue to like, what do you guys feel needs to be improved in like communication within people to lower this?
I feel like, especially for Korean Americans, this is really hard. It's not just like culturally wise, but just fundamentally, especially because right now we're a generation of immigrants. Many families are coming in nowadays, or it's just a lot of Asian Americans are only like first, second, maybe third generation. And what that happens is that it ends up, there's not only just a cultural gap, but you can't really speak, even if you wanted to your parents, because they just speak a different language from you. Or let's just say they do speak English. Another thing with Asian culture that's really hard is that we think a lot about if I provide for the family, that's enough. And up to some point, I think that's very needed. But when it comes to like emotional needs, it becomes very hard. And it also is, if the parent was never taught how to really be there for the child, then even though they want to, the message gets really hard to come across.
So for me, I've been very, very fortunate. So my dad is a huge supporter. He's here, over there. My dad and I are pretty tight, and I don't think it's just because we have similar personalities. To all the parents out there who are watching, I highly suggest that you get to know your child. Your child may be going through things and they don't even know, but my dad has always kept an open relationship with me. Even when I have so much guilt, so much things weighing down on me, my dad has always been open with open arms. And I think, as Christians, we should remember, even though we sin, like, God is there for us. My dad has always taken the time to listen to me. He's given me so much like love and compassion. And I think when it comes to dealing with people with depression, with anxiety, they don't have that emotional, resource to, help support them. Like, for example, in 1 Peter 3:8, it says, "Finally, all of you have unity of mind, sympathy, brotherly love, a tender heart, and a humble mind." I think this is the attitude that we should have as Christians in order to support other people, because depression is a progress. And with love, with constant support, that's how we should deal with it.
Yeah.
I think I want to address like an elephant in the room for myself, but I think the way church culture, particularly in Korean American church culture that has been heavily influenced by Western church culture, I think it doesn't help the situation because of the theology. Okay, so one is, I think Chop Suey, there's a famous song that kind of describes it the best. They call Jesus's death a self-righteous suicide. That's what they called it, right? Now, the reason I appreciate the way that they called that out was because the theology was like, God, like, it's like Jesus was willingly like, yeah, I'm just gonna die. Like, I'm just gonna do this for our, for these people. And it was like something that it was like,
Hero.
yeah, like a hero mentality. And it was like, imagine someone feeling kind of like they're on the verge of committing suicide. They go on a Sunday, right? You can't really talk about your issues because it's like, oh, have more faith, and do that. And then you keep hearing like, pray more. And then you hear about the hero of our faith. Yeah, go ahead, just pray more, do that. This is not a space for everybody to just like go ahead and say, oh, this is what I'm going through. And then like to have a nuanced conversation of like what's going on. Rather like it's the duality of like sin and righteousness. But like the hero of the faith, if we're gonna like say like God wanted Jesus to die, right? And the whole point of this is to get to heaven. And like our whole faith is to get that person to heaven, get that person to heaven. If from my conversations with people that struggle with suicide, they're like, okay, then why not just go to heaven? Why not just go to get the goal? And so I just see this like problem with Christianity that I think needs to be addressed in a theological framework. That, by the way, we have a choir downstairs with children singing. So if you guys hear piano and kids singing, sorry, that's just happening downstairs, and we can't stop them. But yeah.
Thank you for addressing that.
Here's this. So with that said, here's this passage in Matthew 26, right? Jesus went with his disciples to a place called Gethsemane, and he said to them, sit here while I go over there and pray. He took Peter, the two sons of Zebedee, along with him, and he began to be sorrowful and troubled. Then he said to them, my soul is overwhelmed with sorrow to the point of death. Now this is the Messiah that we're talking about, right? Stay here, keep watch with me. Going a little farther, he fell with his face to the ground and prayed, my Father, if it is possible, may you take this cup from me, yet not my will, and your will be done. Then he returned to his disciples, found them sleeping. Could you men not keep watch with me for 1 hour? Asked Peter. Here's something that blows my mind. Jesus is the Messiah. He's God incarnate, right? He's asking for support. Stay with me. Be physically in my proximity. This is how I'm feeling. Let me tell you how I'm feeling. Listen to how I'm feeling. So here is a God who, quote unquote, doesn't need anybody, like meaning like he's all powerful. And yet in this moment of vulnerability, God incarnate says, I need you, Peter.
Yeah.
Don't sleep on me, my disciples. This is a moment of need. I think that's an immense theological kind of idea that we have to embrace, that we have to learn from.
Somehow the evangelical Christianity in general, not only Korean American, inherited a Greek idea of God as immutable being, meaning doesn't feel any passion or pain. But Christianity is really capitalized on the God's compassion and pain. And I think that nature, that's why God became human being. And even I think, Kenneth, you mentioned that passage is extremely important. Many times we just overemphasize Jesus' divinity over humanity, but it shows Jesus' own vulnerability. Even Jesus needs friend support in his most difficult, darkest hours. So I think churches need to really elevate and highlight this dimension that God is always present in our pain and suffering, not only our own moral perfection, but in the time of even guilt, right? Even time of our failure, even darkest time of we walking alone in the valley. Somehow, if we could find a God there, I think that there is some hope. But churches cannot help that connection That's the way I think people feel they are abandoned even by the God, not only by the friends and family, but even by the God. And I think that's a task for the church.
I just want to say like a Bible verse, or honestly like a tip that really helped me when I'm feeling down, and my dad told me, is to get a lot of like verses and constantly recite it, because when you're in that mindset, you know, you want to have like constant reminder that God is there with you. John 8:32 says, "Then you will know the truth, and the truth will set you free." God is always open to you coming to Him, and like you said, you know, I think like just emphasis on that open relationship, that mercy and love that Jesus Christ and that God has for us, that should be a huge reminder as Christians.
Yeah.
Yeah, I love this story of Jesus just being honest and real with his friends. And he's saying, I am overwhelmed. I'm feeling so much sorrow to the point of death. And I just want to remind those viewers who are out there who are struggling with thoughts of suicide, if you are feeling that way, please call someone, talk to somebody. If you know someone who's going through this, reach out to them. There's the National Suicide Prevention Hotline, which we put below, and also a crisis text line, which we will also put below. So if you need someone to reach out to, those resources are there. We'll link some more underneath. And I've also been asked about some tips about how to deal with someone who's struggling with these things, because Kenneth, when you were 13 and you saw your friend with cuts on his arm, like sometimes we're not trained as teenagers to talk about this stuff. So the first step is to ask. Just simply ask them what is going on and take them seriously. Don't just dismiss it. If you see something that's a red flag, ask them. Number 2, get to know their story, hear them out, and explore, empathize with them. Don't discount what they're talking about. Number 4, support the person in understanding their choices. Explore choices with them, explore options. If they're considering suicide, take it serious and help them come up with other options. Once you come up with options, number 5, that means create a plan. After that point, you guys come to a place of agreement and say, okay, for today, for tonight, we're gonna stay safe. We're gonna go to this place, I'm gonna check in with you at this time. And you make those measures to make sure that your friend is safe, or you are safe. So whatever you need, the resources are below, and yeah.
Lastly, for those of you that are watching, thank you so much. You are not alone. You are not a burden, what you're going through. Even the fact that you're considering suicide or you're feeling that way, don't punish yourself and say like, oh, there's something like terribly wrong with me. Seek help. We have phone numbers down here, but also your youth pastors, your parents, your friends, and there are professionals willing to help you. You are not a waste of space. You have a place in this world. We are happier because you are in this world. And thank you guys so much for being vulnerable and sharing your stories. As always, comments, email us, follow us here. If there's a friend that you feel like, dude, you have to listen to this, please tag them or send this directly to them. And we'll see you soon.
I'm so sorry. Can I add something? I wanted to say it, but I ended up backing off. My bad. But
Yeah.
I feel like it's really important.
Yeah.
If you do have a friend that's suicidal, I want to tell you, do not make promises you cannot keep. That person is already in a lot of pain, and any feeling of betrayal can be very hard for them.
So another thing that you have to really think about as someone that's a supporter, someone that you feel like, oh, this person needs support, listening, everything begins with listening, right? But listening is not easy. It's not something that's passive. It's something that's very active. Now, listening also means you have to be empathetic enough so that if this person is coming off defensive, if they're coming off in ways that are avoidant, if they're coming off in ways of blaming you, blaming others, you can't start like projecting like this insecurity, like, oh, I'm gonna fix you, like this is the formula, this is the word. Right. It's a lot more complicated than you think. So, as a good listener, remember that your not your duty, but in that moment, it's not about fixing this person. You don't have the answers a lot of the time, and you maybe not have it any of the time. But listening with grace, with empathy, and with love means you meet them on their terms, not on yours.